Well, hello there and welcome to the attic of the dollhouse for another reading from Grimm's Complete of Fairy Tales. That's right, and if you've been here before, you know we like to get the mood set straight before we dive in with the reading, in which that means getting the lights out, getting that fire crackling element going, and playing us a little crossharp. And tonight I got my low F valved Suzuki. That's right. Let's see if I can squeeze a little bit of tunes out of it. It's been a minute before we did a fairy tale, and I played some crossharp. So let's see what we got. A little bit breathy. I'm running out of breath. Anyhow, that's good enough for us. We'll pick it up on the tail end now, see what we can squeeze out. Anyway, what are we reading tonight? Well, last time I missed a certain tale there. The Peasant in Heaven. So let's get that one rectified, shall we? This is a shorty here, and then we'll dive into the main one here. The Peasant in Heaven. Once upon a time, a poor, pious peasant died and arrived before the gate of heaven. At the same time, a very rich lord came there who also wanted to get into heaven. And then St. Peter came with the key and opened the door and let the great man in, but apparently did not see the peasant and shut the door again. And now the peasant outside heard how the great man was received in heaven and with all kinds of rejoicing, and how they were making music and singing within. And at length all became quiet again, and St. Peter came and opened the gate of heaven, and let the peasant in. The peasant, however, expected that they would make music and sing when he went in also, but all remained quite quiet. He was received with great affection, it is true, and the angels came to meet him, but no one sang. And then the peasant asked St. Peter how it was that they did not sing for him as they had done for the rich man when he went in, and said that it seemed to him that there in heaven things were done with just as much partiality as on earth. And then St. Peter said, by no means, thou art just as dear to us as anyone else, and wilt enjoy every heavenly delight that the rich man enjoys. But poor fellows like thee come to heaven every day, but a rich man like this does not come more than once in 100 years. All right. How about that? And that has been The Peasant in Heaven. All right, let's move on to picking up with the next Grimm's Complete Fairy Tale. And this one is called Our Lady's Child. All right. Close to a large forest there lived a woodcutter and his wife. They had only one child, a little girl of 3 years old. And they were so poor that they no longer had daily bread and did not know how to get food for her. And one morning the woodcutter went out sorrowfully to his work in the forest, and while he was cutting wood, suddenly there stood before him a tall and beautiful woman with a crown of shining stars on her head. And she said to him, I am the Virgin Mary, mother of the child Jesus. Thou art poor and needy, and bring thy child to me. I will take her with me and be her mother, and care for her. The woodcutter obeyed, brought his child, and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven with her. And there the child fared well, ate sugar cakes and drank sweet milk, and her clothes were of gold, and the little angels played with her. And when she was 14 years of age, the Virgin Mary called her one day and said, "Dear child, I'm about to make a long journey, so take into thy keeping the keys of thy 13 doors of heaven. 12 of these thou mayst open, and behold the glory which is within them. But the 13th, to which this little key belongs, is forbidden thee. Beware of opening it, or thou wilt bring misery on thyself." The girl promised to be obedient, and when the Virgin Mary was gone, she began to examine the dwellings of the kingdom of heaven. Each day she opened one of them until she had made the rounds of the 12. In each of them sat one of the apostles in the midst of a great light, and she rejoiced in all the magnificence and splendor. And the little angels who always accompanied her rejoiced with her. Then the forbidden door alone remained, and she felt a great desire to know what could be hidden behind it, and said to the angels, "I will not quite open it, and I will not go inside it, but I will unlock it so that we can just see a little through the opening." "Oh, no," said the little angels, "that would be a sin, and the Virgin Mary has forbidden it, and it might easily cause thy unhappiness." And then she was silent, but the desire in her heart was not stilled, but gnawed there and tormented her, and let her have no rest. And once when the angels had gone out, she thought, "Now I am quite alone, and I could peep in. If I do it, no one will ever know." She took the key, put it in the lock, and turned it round, and then the door sprang open, and she saw there the Trinity sitting in fire and a splendor. She stayed there a while and looked at everything in amazement, and then she touched the light a little with her finger, and her finger became quite golden. Immediately a great fear fell on her, and she shut the door violently and ran away. Nor would her terror quit her, let her do what she might, and her heart beat continually and would not be still. The gold, too, stayed on her finger and would not go away, let her rub it and wash it ever so much. It was not long before the Virgin Mary came back from her journey, and she called the girl before her and asked to have the keys of heaven back. When the maiden gave her the bunch, the Virgin looked into her eyes and said, "Hast thou not opened the 13th door also?" "No," she replied. Then she laid her hand on the girl's heart and felt how it beat and beat, and saw right well that she had disobeyed her order and had opened the door. And then she said once again, "Art thou certain that thou hast not done it?" "Yes," said the girl for a second time, and then she perceived the finger which had become golden from touching the fire of heaven, and saw well that the child had sinned, and said for the 3rd time, "Hast thou not done it?" "No," said the girl for a 3rd time. Then said the Virgin Mary, "Thou hast not obeyed me, and besides, thou hast lied. Thou art no longer worthy to be in heaven." And then the girl fell into a deep sleep, and when she woke she lay on the earth below, and in the midst of a wilderness. She wanted to cry out, but she could not bring forth no sound, and she sprang up and wanted to run away, but whithersoever she turned herself, she was continually held back by thick hedges of thorns, through which she could not break. And in the desert in which she was imprisoned there stood an old hollow tree, and this had to be her dwelling place. Into this she crept when night came, and here she slept. Here, too, she found a shelter from storm and rain, but it was a miserable life, and bitterly did she weep when she remembered how happy she had been in heaven, and how the angels had played with her. Roots and wild berries were her only food, and for these she sought as far as she could go. In the autumn she picked up the fallen nuts and leaves and carried them into the hole. The nuts were her food in winter, and when the snow and ice came, she crept among the leaves like a poor little animal that she might not freeze. Before long her clothes were all torn, and one bit of them after the other fell off her. As soon, however, as the sun shone warm again, she went out and sat in front of the tree, and her long hair covered her on all sides like a mantle. Thus she sat year after year and felt the pain and misery of the world. And one day, when the trees were once again more clothed in fresh green, the king of the country was a-hunting in the forest, and followed a roe, and as it had fled into the thicket, which shut in this bit of the forest, he got off his horse, tore the bushes asunder, and cut himself a path with his sword. And when he had at last forced his way, he saw a wonderfully beautiful maiden sitting under the tree. And she sat there and was entirely covered with her golden hair down to her very feet. He stood still and looked at her full of surprise, and then he spoke to her and said, "Who art thou? And where art thou sitting here in the forest? Why art thou sitting here in the wilderness, rather?" But she gave no answer, for she could not open her mouth. And the king continued, "Wilt thou go with me to my castle?" And then she just nodded her little head. And the king took her in his arms and carried her to his horse and rode home with her. And when he reached the royal castle, he caused her to be dressed in beautiful garments and gave her all things in abundance. Although she could not speak, she was still so beautiful and charming that he began to love her with all his heart. And it was not long before he married her. After a year or so had passed, the queen brought a son into the world, and thereupon the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night when she lay in her bed alone, and said, "If thou wilt tell the truth and confess that thou didst unlock the forbidden door, I will open thy mouth and give thee back thy speech. But if thou perseverest in thy sin and deniest obstinately, I will take thy newborn child away with me." And then the queen was permitted to answer, but she remained hard and said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And the Virgin Mary took the newborn child from her arms and vanquished with it. Next morning, when the child was not to be found, it was whispered amongst the people that the queen was a man-eater and had killed her own child. She heard all this and could say nothing to the contrary, but the king would not believe it, for he loved her very much. When a year had gone by, the queen again bore a son. And in the night the Virgin Mary came to her again, and said, "If thou wilt confess that thou openest the forbidden door, I will give thee thy child back and untie thy tongue. But if thou continuest in sin and deniest it, I will take away with me this new child also." And then the queen again said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And the Virgin took the child out of her arms and away with her to heaven. Next morning, when the child had also disappeared, the people declared quite loudly that the queen had devoured it, and to the king's counselors demanded that she be brought to justice. The king, however, loved her so dearly that he would not believe it, and commanded the councils and the pain of death not to say any more about it. Then the following year the king gave birth to a beautiful little daughter, and for the third time the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night and said, "Follow me." She took the queen by the hand and led her to heaven, and showed her there her two eldest children, who smiled at her and were playing with the ball of the world. When the queen rejoiced, "Fairet," the Virgin Mary said, "Is thy heart not yet softened? If thou wilt own that thou openest the forbidden door, I will give thee back thy two little sons." But for the third time the queen answers, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." And then the Virgin let her sink down to earth once more, and took from her likewise her third child. Next morning, when the loss was reported, all the people cried loudly, "The queen is a man-eater! She must be judged!" And the king was no longer able to restrain his counselors. Thereupon a trial was held, and as she could not answer and defend herself, she was condemned to be burned alive. The wood was got together, and when she was fast bound to the stake, and the fire began to burn round her, the hard ice of pride melted, and her heart was moved by repentance, and she thought, "If I could but confess before my death that I opened the door." Then her voice came back to her, and she cried out loudly, "Yes, Mary, I did it." Straightway rain fell from the sky and extinguished the flames of fire, and a light broke forth above her, and the Virgin Mary descended with the two little sons by her side, and the newborn daughter in her arms. And she spoke kindly to her, and said, "He who repents his sin and acknowledges it is forgiven." And then she gave her the three children, untied her tongue, and granted her happiness throughout her life. And that has been our latest child from Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. All right, hey, how about that? I like them particular fairy tales. The one was a nice little anecdote, and the other a good old-fashioned, a fable almost, teaching you not to sin regardless of what you believe. But maybe you derive your own meaning from them. Hey, I got an affiliate link for this book down in the description. If you're interested in picking up your own copy of Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales, joining along in the read, or just reading ahead yourself, hey, no judgment there. But anyway, that's been the read for tonight. Hope you join us on the next one. So let's take us out a little more a low F harp rather, in Suzuki there. I ran out of breath again. There's a lot of drawing on this bad boy. And event, that's been Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. That's been me sucking on the old F low harp there. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And as I often like to say, kisses to your missus and a tip of my hat to your old cat. You come on back again now, you hear? You understand? You better. I hope you do. All right, take care of yourself now.